A few years ago, I ended up on cruise ships because I was a musician in Melbourne, Australia, with $16,000 of debt and I was out of options. This is the real story of what life is actually like. I'm going to show you the parts that look incredible on Instagram, the parts nobody talks about, including probably the darkest moment I witnessed at sea, and the decision I made on my last contract that meant I never had to go back. Stick around because there's something at the end of this I wish someone had told me before I ever stepped on board. So let's start with the good stuff because there is a lot of it. I was playing in the show band, which basically means you're the house band for all the major production shows on board and you back the guest artists that come through, and the pay was not too bad at the time. I'm sure it's gone up since. For the first 9 months, I was putting about 90% of my paycheck straight into my debt, and the day I made the final payment, I still remember it. That feeling of freedom, genuinely one of the best moments of my life. Something else happened that I didn't expect either was my playing got dramatically better. See, I was jazz trained and I wasn't as used to playing big rooms and big stages, big productions. And suddenly I was gigging almost every single day for about 3 years straight. I really learned how to play out to a big room and fill the stage. You can't really buy that kind of experience. It's a really good gig to cut your teeth on stage, that's for sure. It's also an okay way to travel. I went to some amazing places all over the world, like Alaska, Costa Rica, Brazil, Malaysia, and the Caribbean, places I genuinely never would have had the opportunity to go otherwise. Now, I'll be honest though about the travel because it's not quite what it looks like from the outside. You're only in most of these ports for a few hours at a time, and back when I was doing it, it might be a little bit better now, but internet on ships was so expensive and unreliable that most of your port time was spent finding a cafe and catching up on your life back home. So you're seeing these incredible places through a pretty small window, but they were still real, and I'm glad I saw them, but it's more like a taster of places you might consider going back to at some stage. And then of course there's the people. You meet musicians and performers and amazing people from every corner of the world, different cultures, different backgrounds, different ways of seeing things. And of course, there are dancers. There are a lot of dancers. Some of the best friendships I've made in my life came from ships. But here's the thing about the social side of things. It also has a dark side. Before I get to that though, I want to mention that the living situation can be a little bit grim. You often have to share with someone in a bunk bed, unless you have a musical director role, in which case you have your own cabin. There are single shares as well, where you have your own room to sleep in, but you share a bathroom with someone else. But the point is, oftentimes going into it, you don't actually know ahead of time. So it can be a little bit of a roll of the dice as to what your living situation actually is. Now, I'll be honest about myself here because I think it's important. I was pretty all or nothing on my contracts. Either I was completely locked in, gym every day, sauna, meditating, practicing, or I was in the crew bar every night, socializing, wasting my money, smoking, drinking, staying up too late. There wasn't much middle ground for me, and there isn't much else to do. The social life on a ship can become a bit of a vortex, and it's very easy to get sucked in. I remember one of my musical directors, this was back when I was working for NCL, and we were actually mates, and he pulled me into his office one day, and he was like, look, I'm really not supposed to show you this, but check this out. And he showed me a receipt. It was for one of the musicians on board who had spent his entire paycheck, like 2.5, 3 grand, on beer. Like he just spent it all at the crew bar. I just stood there looking at it like, that's crazy. But that wasn't even the darkest thing that I experienced on a ship. One afternoon, we had some jazz sets scheduled on the pool deck. I got a call from the assistant musical director telling me that the gig had been canceled. Now, if you know anything about ships, gigs don't get canceled, like ever. Something is always worked out, so I knew immediately that something was wrong. That evening, he came to find us and told us what had happened, and our musical director had attempted to take their own life. They tried to jump from the top deck and had been stopped by a guest. They were medically disembarked the next port that we were in, and we never saw them again. It was one of the most sobering moments of my life, and it taught me something that I believe to be true about ships. The ship amplifies whatever mental state you're in going into it. If you're in a good place, it can be an incredible experience. If you're struggling mentally, it can push you to places you didn't think were possible. That's the extreme version. Obviously, most musicians don't end up there, but what happens to most of them is more gradual, and in some ways, it's harder to see coming. There's a culture in the cruise ship musician world that gets worn almost like a badge of honor, which is this darkness. If you've ever seen the Facebook page Dark Showband Musicians, you know what I'm talking about. There's a lot of resentment, a lot of bitterness, a lot of entitlement. And it's interesting because a lot of my dancer friends, they never had that. You see, for dancers, they've worked a lot since they were very young. They've sacrificed a lot for their craft, and they're mostly just genuinely grateful to have a paying gig. That attitude is often very different for musicians. And if you are someone who's a bit more positive, high energy, if you were at all excited about the work or the travel or anything, you got labeled like green or naive, like you didn't understand the realities of the job yet. And that can really wear you down. And before you know it, you're sort of turning into one of them. The trap actually has a name. It's called Just One More Contract. And the joke is, I mean, it's not really a joke, is that musicians will say that for like 10 or 20 years, right? Just one more, then another, until they're old and jaded and they're still on the ship and they hate it and they can't quite remember when it stopped being temporary. There's a lot of musicians like this. And I remember the exact moment I realized I was heading there. I was working for Royal Caribbean. Me and one of the musical directors had been pretty drunk for one of the performances, one of the production shows, which is obviously a massive no. The next day, the cruise director called us into the office and rinsed us for it. And I remember sitting there thinking, like, just fire me. I genuinely don't care. And that thought really scared me. Like that night, I was laying in my bunk bed. I had a roommate, bunk beds, very glamorous. And I just said to him, like, I'm done, man. I don't want to live like this anymore. I knew in that moment it was actually my last contract. I didn't want to become one of those jaded, bitter musicians who complains about everything and comes back year after year and gets more and more miserable. So I made a decision. On my last contract, I actually hired a business mentor, somebody who wasn't a musician, who had no idea about the music industry and who just knew how to build something online. One thing about being a musician on a ship is you have a lot of free time. So every day when we docked, while everyone else was heading to the beach or a resort, I was finding the nearest cafe and I was opening my laptop. I remember my last contracts in the Caribbean, these crappy cafes and bad Wi-Fi, the laptop on a sticky table. I actually started building a coaching program for drummers. I'd done a lot of teaching. I knew it could do well, and I had a clear goal. I really wanted to move to London when I got off the ship, and I needed something to keep me afloat when I got there. So I was filming content on the ship. I worked on the program. I did it every single day, and it felt really scrappy and uncertain. Half the time, I had no idea if any of this would work, but I had a real purpose. And for the first time in a long time, I had a reason to get off the ship in a port that wasn't just to find like, better internet to download more movies. And one afternoon, I was in a cafe in the Caribbean, I remember, and I used to do these consultation calls with potential students to kind of tell them about my program, my offer. I'd done a few of these before, but I'd never actually pitched anyone. I'd never actually asked for money. So I'm going through this call and I start to get to the end. I start telling them about my program and then I told them the price. And right as I was like telling them the price, I noticed in the camera on Zoom, like I look up behind me and there's this like broken TV with all these wires hanging down. And I just thought like, man, there's no way this guy's going to say yes to this program. He obviously politely declined, but it kind of changed something for me, right? I could kind of see what it could become. And long story short, I finished the contract. I moved to London and that program worked out. And I made a decent amount of money with it. So if you take anything away from this, right, save your money. You have zero expenses on a ship, no rent, no food, no bills. There's genuinely no excuse to finish a 6-month contract with nothing to show for it. Use your free time for something. I wasted plenty of mine, but those crappy Caribbean cafes were where I actually built my way out. And think about what comes after. That's the thing most musicians never do. The networking sounds good in theory, but people scatter back to every corner of the world and it doesn't actually travel with you. So figure out what you're building on the other side before you get off the ship, because ships are a stepping stone and the trap isn't the crew bar. It's not the small cabin. It's not even that musician darkness. The trap is getting off the ship with nothing but the memory of it and then going back out because at least there you have an income. Don't let that be you you. If you're curious about the online teaching program I built while I was out there, you can check out this video right here. I walk you through exactly how I did it.